I mentioned in a video a while ago that I was going to do a video on using tarot cards in RPG, solo RPG in particular, but really in any RPG gameplay. And a lot of people asked me about that and said, well, when are you going to do that and whatever. So I decided to move it up on my list. And what I'm going to do first here is tell you, first of all, what this video is not going to be about. So this video is not going to be about any deep reading of tarot or how to interpret cards or how to do lay downs of cards and give readings and things like that. Well, first of all, I'm not qualified to talk about any of that, and there's a ton of stuff online and in books for that. Second of all, it's not going to review the many wonderful both solo and other RPGs that are out there now that use tarot decks as oracles or somehow incorporate tarot decks into their rules and their gameplay. I have covered some of those games on this channel. I play some of those games using my tarot decks, but obviously that is a little bit different than what we're talking about here. And the third thing this video is not going to do is to talk about just the use of pulling a tarot card as an oracle, asking a question, pulling a card and interpreting it. That is a very valid way to use tarot cards, but also not something that needs to be covered here or maybe even needs to be covered in detail at all, because I think it's pretty self-explanatory that tarot decks can be used as pictorial randomizers and symbolic randomizers in gameplay. What I am going to talk about here is different ways, easy ways to use tarot decks in different ways in RPG. And the basis of some of what I'm going to be talking about is the Game Designer's Tarot. This is using tarot cards for narrative design by Jessica Lee. And we are going to take a look at some of what Jessica Lee has in this book. And I will put a link to where I found this online. And I'm not going to go through the entire book here, but the author talks about the use of tarot cards to design a story, to create game narratives, various spreads that you can do to have story elements created, and then also goes into the history of the cards, the meaning of the cards, and then I didn't print that part out, but all 78 cards from the Rider Tarot deck upon which this is based are also in this file, although, as I said, I did not print that out. So some of what I'm going to be talking about is from this document, but I'm going to go a little bit beyond it to talk about the materials that I use and recommend to use with RPG play that go a little bit beyond that. And I am going to start with the Rider Tarot deck because this is perhaps the most common tarot deck that you can find and that people will perhaps even recognize, even if they don't know anything about tarot. And in and of itself, it is the one that has perhaps the most books and references associated with it, as well as is probably the most widely accessible deck. The deck comes with its own little brochure, and you can gain some meanings from those elements if you were to just use it as an oracle to pull a card to answer a question or give a prompt. You could look it up in here. The other book, I think, that goes kind of one step further that I recommend is this Ultimate Guide to the Rider-Waite Tarot, which will give you spreads for each of the cards and talk about the 10 most important symbols on each card, as well as the basic meaning and what might be a spiritual meaning, or if it's the card of the day, or some sort of prognosis card. And again, if you're going to be using this as an oracle, you can perhaps go to the prognosis thing and read that. And if you want an explanation of the individual symbols on the cards, it does this very nicely. So for a little more background on the cards, I think this is a good book to start with. There are just so many out there, and I have purchased a ton of them, but overall, I keep coming back to this one to learn about the cards. The other reason that I think the Rider deck is good, and what I recommend for solo RPG or just RPG in general play, is to consider getting the mini deck of cards, because if you're using these cards as part of gameplay, the very size of them is kind of more familiar as a gaming card size. It's like the kind of card size you'd get when you have small mini cards in a board game, for example. And there is something about, at least for me, there's something about, most of the detail is still very legible. The book itself, it also comes with a book. I mean, that is pretty teeny, but certainly can be read. And I think that for gameplay, as opposed to doing tarot readings, which one might also do, of course, I like to use the mini deck because it feels more like a board game or an RPG card game element, and it feels a little bit more integrated. So I would consider the purchase of a small deck like that if you're going to go with one. There may be other tarot decks have small decks, I'm not sure, but this one certainly does. This is widely available. These are both widely available at online retailers. So having a little bit of background, I think, is recommended because it can enhance what you're going to do when you use the cards in the layouts that we're going to get to in a minute. The other thing I would consider and recommend is the Hermetic Tarot card deck. Now, this one is extremely detailed and complicated to interpret for actual readings because it has elements from a number of different Eastern and Western cultures in it and various symbology. But the actual drawings that are here, just the images and the sort of titles of the cards, like the Lord of Earned Success, for example, or the Lord of Material Happiness, kind of fits thematically with fantasy RPG, at least to my estimation and feeling it does. So again, the theme is, or it feels like something that would integrate more into an RPG perhaps than the types of imagery and kind of bright colors that are on the standard deck. So if you're looking for something to kind of integrate more thematically in a visual sense, this can be really useful. And it's a little bit more grim, and you have some fantasy type elements in here. So even if you're just using it as an oracle to look at the pictures and that's it, I think that getting this deck can be useful. The downside to this deck is, as I said, if you're trying to use it to learn how to do tarot readings, I would not recommend it. It's not a beginner's deck at all. And there is, unlike the Rider-Waite deck, which has a ton of books that you can choose from to learn that way about what the decks mean, there isn't, to my knowledge, one kind of standard recommended book to understand everything that's in this deck. There are books that talk about the Secret Order of the Golden Dawn, which is what this is based upon, but they're not keyed to the cards. And there are other books that talk about other decks that also have elements of what is in this deck, but again, they're not keyed to the cards. So I've been looking for a book that just is keyed to this actual deck, but have not found it. So if anybody does know of that, please let me know in the comments, because that's something that I would like to get. Okay, well, that's all. I have to sort that out. So the easiest way, I think, to use tarot in an RPG, beyond, as mentioned, just pulling in for an oracle or to answer a question, is to go to this work by Jessica Lee, The Game Designer's Tarot, because it's explicitly about using tarot cards for narrative design in RPG. So as indicated here, the book focuses on creating adventures, campaigns, and one-shot stories. And the author talks about how stories are important in RPG for different reasons than other stories, in the sense that they're actually played out and that the story belongs to the players, and that the depth of the story is going to impact the depth of the gameplay. And that is true indeed with whether it's solo RPG or traditional tabletop RPG, especially in solo RPG, where you are the creator as well as the player of the story. It can be helpful to have a structure to create a story and then play into that story. So the book talks a bit about this, and then starts to show you some of the various story spreads that she's created to go with RPGs. And if you're familiar with any books on tarot, you'll know that they're often presented with spreads of varying complexity, often starting with 3-card spreads and working the way up to the kind of classic Celtic cross spread. So in this book, the tarot spreads for story elements of 3 cards. There are a couple. There's an antagonist, a setting, and a conflict, meaning you're going to pull those cards and lay them out and assign those story elements to what you interpret in the card. Relevance, lesson, application, and then the standard sort of past, present, and future. Problem, cause, solution. Those are very common in any tarot spreads. Option 1, option 2, option 3. The book then walks you through with examples how she's interpreting these, and this is really useful. I'm not going to go through it here, but if you get this PDF, you'll see it's very useful to understand the ways in which the card meanings are extrapolated into that. And the classic Celtic cross here is presented. This is perhaps the most popular of the general spreads, and she's got it keyed to how this can work with RPG. And I think this is kind of the core of the way to use this book to create a story or elements of your story. So card number 1 is the current situation. The crossing card is the obstacle or the block. The 3rd card here is the root or the undercurrent of the scenario. The 4th card represents the past of the characters, the backstory, we might call it. The 5th card is the future, the possibilities that might happen or what the players might want to focus on. The 6th card is the future that's going to contribute to the outcome. So what's going to happen as they move through the scene or the story itself. The 7th card is the emotional state, so it could be of the party or of the character. The 8th card is the environment. What are the influences that are impacting this scenario? The 9th card are hopes, fears, or lessons. What kind of help might be coming to this party? What type of obstacles may hinder them? And then the final card is about the outcome. What type of rewards might happen? What does success look like? Or maybe what are the consequences for failure? So using this type of spread, putting it into an RPG context, you can either do it to sort of set out and just start an entire story, or you can do it in the context of the middle of a story to see where you're going to go next. Anything along those lines can be useful. So as an example of this, I'm just going to use this deck, and I'm just going to randomly place out cards that will be in this manner. So I'm going to do the Celtic cross, and then we'll sort of take a look at what this could possibly mean in the context of a story like this. And we have 7, 8, 9, and 10. So if we look at this spread, and I'm not going to go into great detail here because of time, and also I don't even have like characters or a setting or anything, but just to give you an example of how one might interpret this. So our current situation here is this Wheel of Fortune, and this has to do with destiny, and generally speaking, it is a positive thing. It's the forces of life. But the crossing card is the 10 of Cups, and these cards are both 10 cards. The 10 of Cups has to do with emotion, and the 10 of Cups has to do with abundance and positive emotion. So we've got two things that are very similar, yet we're told that one is in opposition. So if I was developing this as a story, if I had characters, that might say to me that perhaps maybe somebody in my party is going to be betraying me, or maybe somebody that one of my main characters is related to is going to end up being betraying them, or something like that. And that the situation that they're in has to do with this. Again, it would be more concrete if I was coming in with an existing set of characters or something like that, but just trying to give you sort of the general overview of what that could possibly look like in terms of developing it. So then we come to the third card, which is supposed to be the root of the, or the undercurrent of this scenario. Like, how did these things come to be? And here we have the Eight of Wands. Now, the Wands in general has to do with kind of creativity, and the Eight of Wands has to do with travel and movement and just in general things changing. The booklet talks about things like rapid rush, violence, swiftness, courage, boldness, freedom, warfare. So what I would say is, if this is the root of something, perhaps this is a story that has to do with, say, two siblings, and there was harmony in the family until something happened. Maybe there was war, and one of the siblings was perhaps promoted over the other one to be the leader. And as a result of that, this is the underlying cause of the change, or the things that are happening that is going to instigate this story, this plot, whatever it might be, moving forward. So to evaluate that, we go to card 4, which is the sort of past of this. This is the Princess of Cups. Cups, again, being the emotional suit. And we say the Princess of the Palace of Floods is here. And in general, the Four of Cups is going to be about, the 4 card is about relationships. This has to do with contemplation and inward focus. So if we think about that being something about the past, we could perhaps suggest that what has happened is maybe not completely surprising. Maybe it has been expected or anticipated by at least one of the characters, but it is still working to create some conflict or obstacle that needs to be overcome. And then the 5th card is has to do with basically like future possibilities. What should be done about all of this? And we notice here this is another princess, so related to the past. And again, you could interpret that however you wanted to in the context of your story. And this is the Princess of Pentacles, and here it's the Princess of the Echoing Hills. And what this means is that, so Pentacles is kind of to do with material concerns. The Pentacle suit has to do with like kind of material things. And the Princess of Pentacles is focusing on like being a student or something new that is happening. And so in the context of that being the future possibilities, it does make sense that perhaps the story has to do with whichever character was perhaps overlooked, or as the one that is not the chosen one has to, in the context of this story, perhaps can do a quest or learn something to be anointed in the future or to have success in the future. That could be one possibility. Again, there are multiple interpretations that it could be. What's going to contribute to this outcome? Well, interestingly, we've got another princess here. So, maybe these are women characters, and we have the Princess of Wands. So Wands represents kind of creativity, magical nature of things, and this is the Princess of the Shining Flame. And the princess in this has to do with, well, this can be seen kind of as a messenger. Creativity, enthusiasm, things of that nature. So a kind of messenger, and this would be the future. So contributing to that, you might say, well, we need to be on the lookout for, there's going to be some type of sign. There's going to be some type of sign in the story that is going to let us know when the character that is being thwarted is ready to step into their proper role. Something of that nature. Again, very vague, because I don't even at this point have characters. I think normally I would start with some characters and then apply the story to the characters, but I didn't do that here. But you can still see you're getting some kind of framework for a story. So the 7th card is supposed to represent the kind of emotional state or the tone of the story that you are looking here, and in general, 5 in numerology is that is a contentious number. And the swords that we have here, so this is the Lord of Defeat. And the 5 of Swords here has to do with bullying and conflict and ultimately defeat. So if that is the emotional state of the story, I would say that's telling me, if I'm going to develop my characters, that my main PC is the one who is overlooked, who's having the obstacle, as opposed to the one who is having the success. And we kind of got that from the other cards anyway. But maybe it's, again, the princesses are sending me toward, maybe it's the younger daughter of a king, and her older brother is not worthy, but he is being the one who is ascending to the throne, and she has to prove herself. And there's discord. Their sense of the emotional state of this story is discordant because of that. So we have some outside influences here represented by this 8th card, and this is the 6 of Pentacles. And again, the Pentacles has to do with kind of material concerns. So if we're in this concept of like an aristocracy or a kingdom that is at stake, that would have to do with that. And this represents, this is the Lord of Material Success. So thinking about this card, which can also represent sort of like skills or employment or craftsmanship, for example, the outside influences is that. So there is the outside world of the aristocracy perhaps is driving our protagonist to overcome the obstacles, to prove herself and to assert herself, even though she has been the one who has been overlooked. And now we get to the 9th card, and this is kind of like the card that represents hopes or fears or lessons. And it might say what type of help do we need, or what type of things will we learn about. And for this card, we have the 8 of Swords, and this says this is the Lord of Shortened Force. And the swords, again, has to do with kind of reasoning and things of that nature. And this particular card represents entrapment, and it represents isolation and self-entrapment. And in other decks, it actually is clear that you yourself can be the one to free yourself from the bonds of your own entrapment. It's not, that imagery is not really that evident here, but that is evident in other decks. So this is the kind of lesson that we're being told, and that does kind of reinforce what we've been developing for our PC, to represent that she has the knowledge to free herself or to overcome these obstacles in the story that you're going to be developing. And then finally is the outcome. Our 10th card is going to be an anticipated outcome here. We're back to Swords, the 4 of Swords, and the 4 is a relational number. And we have here the Lord of Rest from Strife. Well, that is actually pretty conclusive in a lot of ways. It represents the resting or the calming of the mind. And that, in fact, this random draw really does create a type of scenario that you could be, if you were a GM, walking your players through, knowing what the outcome of the story is. And if you're playing this on your own, either revealing the entire spread before you start or revealing cards one by one, you can use to direct your story. In this case, it would actually impact how I built the characters, because I didn't have characters in mind, but now I have this clear sense based on the spread of what we may be aiming for in terms of who our PCs are and what type of world they live in. So having this kind of spread, you can continue to use the deck in ways that are more than just pulling for an oracle. You can use them to develop things like characters or abilities that your character has, even locations or clues to where the characters should go to find information to deal with the problem or the challenge that they're trying to work with. They can be representative of treasure or combat aspects in terms of what's going on. Basically, you can use these cards to add any type of detail that you want, and you can do that by having a single card pull or 2 or 3 cards and just interpreting the results as you see them, either on top of the framework of the story that you created or along the way as you play through your story. So using this guide, I think, is a very easy way to get into taking a step into using tarot cards to do more than just be an answer to a question or a symbol or a focus point, but actually add in some narrative elements to your game or even create an entire scenario as you saw here. And again, I do recommend taking a look at the most common deck, the Rider-Waite deck, and perhaps in a mini format to kind of feel more like a deck of cards that you might see in a game, and consider the possibility of getting a guidebook to give you some more native information about each card that may contribute to your ability to interpret the cards as you play them based on the information in Jessica Lee's The Game Designer's Tarot.